Hello and welcome to a special coverage of the 2026 Zimbabwe National Budget. I'm Rumbidzai Venke.
And I'm Volake Sage.
Today marks a pivotal moment for the nation as the Minister of Finance, Professor Mthuli Ncube, will present a fiscal plan that will change the trajectory of our economy in the coming year at the new Parliament building in Mount Hampden. Now, the budget comes at a time when Zimbabwe stands at a crossroads and trying to balance the urgent need for economic stability with the equally pressing demand for inclusive growth and improved service delivery.
Over the past year, Zimbabwe has grappled a mix of challenges and opportunities. Currency volatility, rise in public debt, and now an estimated 21 billion. At the same time, the economy has undergone a major statistic shift, with GDP rebasing increasing the national output from 32 billion to 45 billion. And Treasury projecting a growth rate of 6.6 for 2026. Now, this budget is also significant because it comes at the tail end of NDS-1, setting the stage for the next medium-term development strategy, NDS-2. Citizens, businesses, and investors alike are closely watching to see whether the budget will address long-standing issues such as funding gaps in health, the cost of doing business, and the welfare of vulnerable groups.
From the informal sector's role in revenue generation to mining royalties, from agriculture and presidential input schemes, today's budget presentation carries immense expectations. Will the 2026 national budget deliver? Will it deliver on bold reforms, or will it be another cautious balancing act in a difficult fiscal environment? We will have to wait and see. Now, to get deeper into the conversation, we are joined in the studio by Kudakwashe Taimo, Natasha Mtasa, and Tatenda Nyachenga. Thank you so much for joining us.
Such a pleasure to have you. Thank you.
And we also have Kudzanai Sharara on standby, who will be giving us a breakdown from the previous budget to act as a bedrock before we get into this conversation as we direct our focus on the 2026 budget statement about to be presented by the Finance Minister. We'll hear from Kudzanai Sharara.
For as a country, as we get to hear from the Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion, Professor Mthuli Ncube, as he get to present the 2026 national budget. Now, this is a budget that will set the tone as we go into 2026. There are expectations in terms of revenues that the country can collect, also in terms of expenditure. What are the priorities that the minister is going to put forward as he proposes the national budget statement in Parliament? Now, we are coming from a 2025 national budget that was where the economy was expected to grow by 6.6%, and it was also informed by NDS-1. Now, as we move into 2026 until 2030, the national budget will be informed by NDS-2. Now, there are key areas that that we expect the minister to touch on, and just looking at in terms of macroeconomic highlights, where in terms of economic growth, the economy, as I said, in 2025 was expected to grow by 6.6%, but going into 2026, the economy is expected to grow by 5% on the back of a good agriculture season, as well as the mining sector, which has been enjoying a very good international commodity prices. The tourism sector, as well as the booming construction industry, is also expected to weigh in on that projected growth for the economy. Also, key will be in terms of inflation. The country has enjoyed really high inflation when it comes to the local currency, that is the ZiG, where inflation at some point was at 82%, but through measures that were put in place by the monetary policy or the monetary regulators, that is the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, we have seen the inflation coming down from as high as 92% to about 32% at the last count, that is in the month of October. And as we go towards the end of the year, inflation is actually expected to go down further to close the year at 20%. And in terms of the outlook going into 2026, inflation is expected to drop further down from around between 10 to 15%. Also, another key area is in terms of budget deficit, what we are collecting as a country versus what we are going to spend. The ministry has got a target of about 3%, but for 2026, the budget deficit is expected to be just about 1.4%. with a shortfall of about $722 million with regards to that. And then when it comes to government collections in terms of revenue, the economy is expected to collect as much as $8.7 billion, whilst in terms of spending, government is expected to spend about $9.4 billion, which will result in a trade or a budget deficit rather of about $722 million. And in terms of a percentage of GDP, it's just about 1.4%, which is lower than the target of NDS2, which is a budget deficit of about 3%. Now looking at other areas that the minister is expected to touch on, I think the minister is expected to also support measures that have been put by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, especially with regards the money supply regime, where the Reserve Bank has done very well in terms of reducing money supply growth of which was about 10%, and is expected in 2024, and is expected to drop further to just about 2% at the end of that was the number at the end of September 2025, and this reflects the tight monetary policy regime that the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe has been following through various instruments, including a tight or high interest rates of about 35%.
Many thanks to Kudzanai Sharara for giving us that very important bedrock. And of course, we continue to look forward to the presentation of the 2026 budget shortly this afternoon. We will also be getting visuals from the new Parliament building, where we also have Eben Mabunda on standby for our crossover. In the meantime, we will, as you can see there, things looking like they're shaping up as we await the arrival of the relevant minister, or it does look like he is walking in there, but we will certainly be giving you a live crossover of the budget as it is presented by the finance minister, holding the leather bag there that contains all of Zimbabwe's hopes, expectations for 2026. So there you see it there. We will be having it open and, of course, hearing exactly what it means for all industry, the expectations, as well as looking at those key indicators, FDI investment. We also want to look at issues around, taxation and how industry will be supported. Also looking at the various vital sectors. That's your education, that's health as well. Will the Abuja Declaration be fulfilled in 2026? So do stay with us as we will be crossing over to Mount Hampton, where very shortly Professor Mthuli Ncube, the Minister of Finance, will be giving us the 2026 budget statement. We do bring you back into the studio in the meantime, where we do have Kudata, Tenda, and Natasha. Let's get into some of your expectations. Perhaps I can start with you, Kudakwashe. What are some of the expectations that you are expecting to see from the budget statement as government turns the tables, as it tables the 2026 national budget? Key indicators or shifts that you're looking to see?
Okay, thank you for that good question. I think perhaps we just start by looking at the 2025 national budget. We saw when the year commenced that the key drivers that were centering on the 6% growth this year, it was likely the agricultural sector. We're talking of the mining sector, as well as the electricity that was projected to grow about 10.6%. But in my view, what I'm just keen on looking is they're anticipating a 5.4% growth in 2026. And in the agricultural sector, we have seen, if anyone is to be told that we have seen a growth in the sector this year, we can all agree. We saw the tobacco sector reaching 353 kg of tobacco. We saw the wheat, recording those record-breaking levels, surpassing the 640,000 tons, and surpassing the national requirement of wheat of around 600,000 tons. But if I were to look at the mining sector, I just want a glimpse into it more and to see what the policy is structured as we are going into 2026. Why I'm saying so? Because if you are to look at, yes, it's good that there's been good commodity prices and gold and other platinum prices, but these are the smallholder farmers and not the large miners.
Thank you so much. We will continue to hear from our in-studio analysts, but it does look like the Minister of Finance is ready to present the 2026 national budget. Finance Minister is expected to roll out the 2026 budget. Now, there have been extensive, there was a pre-budget seminar done in Bulawayo, attended by parliamentarians. Many of the things that were spoken of highly anticipated to make it through to the budget. We also are looking to see how each sector will be supported when the Finance Minister starts to roll out the budget. And we are, of course, waiting on hand just to hear how each and every sector will be broken down, where the necessary support will come from. But all eyes are definitely on Mount Hampton and New Parliament as we await with bated breath the presentation of the 2026 budget. And we will be giving you post-budget analysis as well from the studio. We do have our analysts in the studio as well as many opinions around what will come out, but of course the expectations have been laid bare, and we are looking forward to hearing the presentation in just one moment. And one has to marvel also at just how majestic the new Parliament building is in all of its majesty. But definitely will be the talk on many households, businesses, as we are really keen to see how it will go. But before, I think once things are ready, we will cross back. Coming back into the studio, we did cut you off there, Kuda. You were talking about mining expectations. Perhaps you want to finish that thought, and then we'll come to you to tend to look at issues around stabilizing the economy, strengthening social services, and very importantly, restoring public confidence in fiscal management.
Yeah, let me just round it up. So I was just saying, of course, I'm just looking at the key sectors. That's the agricultural sector, the mining sector, and even the energy sector. Because you saw even as the year commenced, some of the projections in the energy sector were that we have a capacity to produce around 2,800 megawatts. But as the year commenced, we were producing 1,100 megawatts. But if I'm to tell you, according to ZPC, as of November, we are producing only 1,286 megawatts. So now, if we had projections to add another 1,100 megawatts, where did we go wrong? So you see, so issues to do with the budget, those are some of the key things that we need to look at. Because if you're looking at the energy sector, no economy grows without power supply and without ensuring that those tenets are put in place. So I'm just looking to see how those are being put in place. It's always just looking at the overall tech space to see which sectors are going to, because I'm sure as of the 2025 national budget, 81% of the revenue came from the tax, and the remaining 19% were from non-tax revenue. So I'd like to see in 2026, are they intending to roll out more taxes as well, and in which areas are they targeting? Something like that.
All right, interesting indeed. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. The President of the Republic, Dr. Emmerson Mnangagwa, just walking into Parliament there and being received. So he is sat in his chair and also waiting for the show to begin. So we will shortly be getting into that as soon as the Finance Minister takes the podium. Tatenda, let's hear your views then on your expectations, that balancing act, restoration of public confidence, social services.
Thank you, Robuti. I would like to... I was actually creating some scenarios in terms of our expectations. The number one being being ambitious, to say we are going to look forward to a growth-driven policy or austerity. I think we've had austerity for some time, around 2019 when the Honorable Minister came into office.
Austerity for prosperity?
Yeah, but my only view, maybe looking at the 2026 national budget, it's going to be moderate, or it's going to remain or maintain this current status quo.
All right, sorry to cut you there. Just to bring your attention now to the new Parliament building, where the Minister of Finance, Professor Mthuli Ncube, is presenting the 2026 budget. We'll be back in the studio for the post-budget analysis.
Published in Statutory Instrument 127A of 2021 provides that every year the Minister responsible for Finance must present to the National Assembly a statement of the estimated revenues and expenditures of the government in the next financial year. In compliance with these provisions, Mr. Speaker, sir, I therefore move that leave be granted to present a statement of the estimated revenues and expenditures of the Republic of Zimbabwe for the 2026 financial year and make provisions for matters ancillary and incidental to this purpose. By way of introduction, Mr. Speaker, sir, let me begin by acknowledging the leadership and guidance.
Sorry, I need to put the question. Thank you. The question before the House is a motion it's not finished. The Honourable Minister, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you. Let me begin by acknowledging the leadership and guidance of His Excellency, from His Excellency the President, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, in formulating this budget. I also want to thank our two Vice Presidents, Dr. CGDN Chwenga and Dr. KCD Mohadi, and my colleague, comrades, ministers, for their support, which was helpful in shaping the proposed 2026 national budget. Last but not least, Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to thank yourself, portfolio committees, portfolio committee chairs, the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee especially, and members of this august House and Senate, and business executives, individuals, professionals, representatives of special groups, civil society, development partners, and many other stakeholders who made valuable suggestions and inputs during the formulation of this budget. The various inputs from all the stakeholders were instrumental in shaping the 2026 national budget, making it the people's budget as it reflects the aspirations of the people of Zimbabwe. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the gist of the budget itself. The 2026 national budget is setting the stage for this second five-year national development strategy, NDS2, which covers the period 2026 to 2030, which is integral to Vision 2030. This budget has been crafted under the theme enhancing drivers of economic growth and transformation towards Vision 2030. The 2026 national budget is therefore an implementation tool for NDS2, which, by the way, was launched late this morning by His Excellency at State House. So we do have a strategy, NDS2, Mr. Speaker said. Members of Parliament will receive copies, and the strategy will also be translated into all our nationally recognized languages, as usual. Fiscal consolidation efforts are beginning to pay off handsomely. Judicious implementation of prudent fiscal policies, essentially expenditure alignment and cash budgeting, coupled with complementary monetary policy, has now anchored inflation expectations, underpinning macroeconomic stability over the past 12 months. As alluded by Professor Kenneth Rogoff, who is a professor of public policy at Harvard, professor of economics and public policy, I quote, "Sound fiscal management is the foundation for economic resilience and transformation," close quote. This insight underscores the critical importance to maintain fiscal discipline as we navigate the path towards sustainable and inclusive growth. The 2026 national budget, therefore, seeks to balance between expanding on the gains of NDS1 while safeguarding fiscal sustainability, underscoring government's commitment to promoting durable and enduring macroeconomic stability, characterized by low and stable ZIG inflation. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to global economic developments, focusing on growth specifically. Global growth is projected to moderate from 3.3% in 2024 to 3.2% in 2025 and to 3.1% in 2026, reflecting obviously slower growth and heightened trade uncertainty and geopolitical tensions. I do have some slides on the screen. If you look up, I hope it's visible to all. You can see a few countries up there, advanced economies, United States, Euro, Germany, China, India, to mention a few, UK. And you can see the growth rates, where India is leading the pack with a growth rate of over 6%, followed by China, just over 4%. The sub-Saharan Africa region is expected to register growth of 4.1%, both in 2024 and 2025, before edging up to 4.4% in 2026. On the other hand, economic growth in the SADC region, which is our region, is projected to improve from 2.6% in 2024 to 2.9% in 2025 and to 3% in 2026. Again, you can see the slide up there showing various countries from the SADC region, and Zimbabwe, I think they skipped the other slide, showing a growth of 6.6% in 2026, in 2025 rather, and then 5% in 2026. Strong growth indeed, Mr. Speaker said. While this marks a moderate recovery, growth remains softer than expected due to persistent global headwinds, weak external demand, and energy deficits that are afflicting a few countries, and also is due to financing constraints. What I have up there, Mr. Speaker, is a chart showing a global inflation which seems to be headed downwards. This is positive. It may mean that global interest rates beyond 26 will come down, making it cheaper for us to access loans globally. A comment on international commodity prices. Following several years of volatility, global economic prices are generally expected to move sideways, if not slightly decline. This is in both 2025 and 2026. But I must make an exception in the sense that gold, which is silver, the precious metals are faring better than, in fact, they're doing very well compared to basic metals. You can see the chart, therefore, precious metals are streaking upwards exponentially. But the prior chart, which was showing the oil price, was curving downwards, which is good for us since we're a net oil importer. Now, let me turn to the domestic economy, the Zimbabwe economy. Mr. Speaker, the domestic economy exhibited strong performance during the first half of the year, which is estimated to have grown by 8.1%. You can see in the first quarter of the second bar from your right, Q1, the economy grew at 5.1%. In the second quarter, which is the last bar on your right, the economy grew at 11.04%. The average is 8.1%, so strong growth indeed. The domestic economy is therefore now projected to achieve a growth rate of 6.6% in 2025, as I've already mentioned. This revised projection is primarily on account of strong recovery in agriculture and other sectors such as mining, but all sectors are doing well. They are all in positive territory, Mr. Speaker. There's a chart with all manner of figures up there showing the growth rates of various sectors. You can see agriculture growing at 24% this year, and then information and communication growing at 12.5%. Those are the sort of star performers, followed by mining and quarrying 7.3% and so forth. Overall growth 6.6%. Following the national accounts revaluation exercise by Zimstat, nominal GDP in 2025 is projected at $52.4 billion US dollars, resulting in a gross national income per capita, or GNI per capita, of $3,200 US dollars per person per year. In 2026, economic growth is projected at 5%, underpinned by the following assumptions. One, expected normal to above normal rainfall with irrigated cropping expected to boost the performance of the agricultural sector. Two, currency and exchange rate and price stability. A prudent fiscal policy and tight monetary policy will anchor the currency and the exchange rate and inflation stability. Three, focusing on steady international mineral commodity prices. Most commodity prices are expected to moderate, except for gold prices. Low fuel prices will reduce the domestic cost of production, while higher prices for gold will promote further mining sector growth, increasing foreign currency inflows. And finally, on the ease of doing business, Mr. Speaker said, the ongoing review and rationalization of the various licenses, fees, and charges is expected to continue, with the overall impact of lowering domestic costs of production and doing business and improving national and global competitiveness for our local products. Let me turn to inflation developments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, inflation developments in 2025 reflect the cumulative positive impact of prudent fiscal policy, sustained tight monetary policy, and proactive money supply growth management by the central bank, the RBZ. In terms of inflation, month-on-month ZIG inflation was minus 0.4%, while annual inflation was at 32.7% in the month of October 2025. The figure for November came out yesterday, Mr. Speaker. Month-on-month ZIG inflation is at about 0.2%, and then year-on-year ZIG inflation is at 19%. So I'm confident, Mr. Speaker said, that I'm confident, Mr. Speaker said, that before year end, we'll see an inflation level of closer to 10% and single-digit inflation in the first quarter of next year. And if this happens, Mr. Speaker, say, that will be the first time we've achieved that kind of single-digit domestic inflation since 1997. In 2026, the ZIG annual inflation, let me take that again, the US dollar month-on-month inflation and year-on-year inflation was 0.3% and 13% respectively in the month of October 2025. In 2026, the ZIG annual inflation rate is projected to decline to single-digit levels, reflecting anchored inflation expectations, currency and exchange rate volatility, as well as strengthened monetary fiscal policy coordination. Let me turn to the external sector, Mr. Speaker. What I have there is a chart of the exchange rates. You can see that spread between the parallel and the official rate has remained steady, within the 20% band. That has helped us a lot in managing activities in the parallel market, which have caused us some challenges in the past. Let me turn to the external sector. Mr. Speaker said, during 2025, the country's external position improved as a result of significant foreign currency inflows, estimated at 12 billion during the first 9 months of the year of 2025. During the same period, exports and imports amounted to $7 billion US dollars. There's a table there showing the various figures. As a result, the current account surplus was at $961.3 million US dollars during the first 6 months of 2025. This is compared to 31 million recorded during the same period last year, 2024. A massive increase in the current account surplus. To year end, the current account surplus is projected at 1.3 billion US dollars. This surplus is expected to further increase to 1.4 billion in 2026, underpinned by sustained export growth and strong diaspora inflows. Let me say a word about the diaspora inflows or remittances. Diaspora inflows, Mr. Speaker, have remained strong in the main, reflecting global economic strength and recovery across major regions of the world, all major regions of the world. Diaspora remittances are projected to surpass 2.7 billion US dollars in 2025 and will be estimated to be at 2.8 billion US dollars in 2026. Again, there's a chart showing the growth in remittances all the way from 922 million in 2019 and with the projection of 2.7 billion in 2025 and 2.8 billion in 2026 up on the charts. Let me turn to public finance development, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, revenue collections during the period January to September 2025 amounted to 156.3 billion ZIG, while expenditures were at 152.5 billion ZIG, with the fiscal framework right up there. On a cash basis, revenues which exceeded expenditures by 3.7 billion were utilized for partial repayment of some of the outstanding government loan obligations. In US dollar terms, revenue collections amounted to 5.9 billion against expenditures of 5.7 billion US dollars. As at September 2025, various ministries, departments and agencies had utilized an average of 56% of their allocations. However, due to the actual exchange rate outturn of 26.7 ZIG to $1 US dollar, compared to the assumed budget exchange rate of 36 ZIG to $1 US dollar, which we used when we did the budget last year, actual average utilization stands at 75% across our various MDAs.
What does the fiscal outlook look like to year end, Mr. Speaker, sir? Cumulative revenue collections to year end are projected at 215.7 billion, or 7.96 billion, which is really close to 8 billion, Mr. Speaker, sir. This is against expenditures of 219.46 billion ZIG, or 8.1 billion US dollars, resulting in a projected budget deficit of 3.8 billion ZIG, or 140.1 million US dollars, which is 0.3% of our gross domestic product, GDP. Coming to public debt, Mr. Speaker, sir, the country's stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt was 622.3 billion ZIG, or 23.4 billion US dollars, which is about 44.7% of our gross domestic product, GDP, as of the end of September 2025. Let me turn to the 2026 national budget macro fiscal framework, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, in 2026, government is targeting to collect revenues amounting to 288 billion ZIG, or 16.9% of GDP, or about 9.4 billion US dollars equivalent. The revenue envelope, coupled with the government's borrowing capacity, provides for an overall global expenditure amounting to 290 billion ZIG, or 9.5 billion US dollars, which translates to 17% of our GDP. The projected revenue collection and expenditure ceiling results in an almost balanced budget, with a small budget deficit of only 3.2 billion ZIG, or 105.9 million US dollars, or minus 0.2% of GDP, all within the static target of 3% of GDP, Mr. Speaker, sir. A word about domestic partners who have supported us. Mr. Speaker, sir, the country received development assistance amounting to 386.1 million during the period January to September 2025, against a target of 500 million US dollars. Of course, we thank our development partners for these resources. In 2026, development assistance is projected at 350 million, a 30% drop from the 2025 projection, attributed to recent developments which have resulted in a global decrease in official development assistance flows. Let me turn to the strategic priorities for the 2026 national budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, the 2026 national budget is anchored on the 10 national priorities of the National Development Strategy 2, NDS 2, which are as follows: the macroeconomic stability and financial sector deepening, inclusive growth and structural transformation, infrastructure development and housing, agriculture, food security, climate and environment. That's the fourth one. Fifth one, science, technology, digitization, innovation, and human capital development. Then job creation, youth entrepreneurship and development, creative industries and culture. Then social development, gender and social protection. 7, regional development and inclusivity through devolution and decentralization. That was number 8, by the way. 9, image building, international relations and trade. And finally, number 10, good governance, institution building, peace and security. During the budget consultations, the various ministries, departments and agencies submitted bids of over 828.5 billion ZIG, which is way above the available capacity of the economy, amounting to 253 billion ZIG. So the bids were almost 3.5 times what was available or what the economy could generate. And this is what is being distributed to our various ministries, departments and agencies. Up on the screen, you'll see the various distributions, but I'll go through each of them one by one because they are all aligned to the 10 pillars in NDS2, which I've already mentioned. I must hasten to say, Mr. Speaker, that in the first half of any year, the revenue inflows are typically below the annual average run rate. In order to align expenditure with the seasonality of the revenue collections, the budget will be executed on the basis of a conservative annual revenue projection of $9 billion in the first half of the year, with expenditure ceilings for votes calibrated to the typical in-year revenue pattern and reflected in the cash release plan. This will help ensure that expenditure remains fully financeable, that no new payment arrears are incurred, and that unbudgeted for expenditures are curtailed. Should revenue collections in the first half of the year exceed this seasonal baseline, expenditure ceilings will be accordingly be adjusted in the second half of the year in a transparent manner within the approved appropriations and in line with clearly communicated priorities. Let me turn to the 10 priority areas under NDS2, which also drive the budget allocations. Mr. Speaker, the 2026 national budget seeks to consolidate and sustain macroeconomic stability beyond the near term. This really speaks to the pillar of macroeconomic stability and financial sector deepening. Turning to the pillar of inclusive economic growth and structural transformation, the focus of this budget is to sustain structural transformation through value addition and beneficiation, prioritizing job creation, expanding the digital economy, and embedding climate adaptation and resilience. Turning to industry within this pillar, in view of the manufacturing sector's strategic role in driving structural transformation, the government has set aside 459.8 million ZiG for the Ministry of Industry and Commerce to support tooling and working capital requirements of the industry, as well as for improvement of the policy environment. What I have up there, Mr. Speaker, is a chart which is an index of volume from the manufacturing sector. You can see it's been trending upwards, and we would like this to continue through these budget allocation to improve policy and to trigger certain incentives within the industrial sector. Turning to the mining sector, in support of sustainable mining development in 2026, a total of 789 million ZiG has been set aside for the Ministry of Mines and Mining Development in order to enhance its operations that serve to promote beneficiation and value addition. I now want to turn to the tourism sector while I'm on the issue of structural transformation. To support the growth trajectory in the tourism sector, a budget allocation of 339.4 million ZiG has been set aside to bolster the operations of the Ministry of Tourism and Hospitality. This will cement Zimbabwe as a destination of choice. Mr. Speaker, recently we were voted or chosen as the #1 destination by Forbes magazine. This we must sustain. And you can see, Mr. Speaker, on the chart up there, the recovery in tourism, in domestic tourism, since 2020 has been a remarkable turnaround indeed. Let me turn to the pillar of agriculture, food security, climate, and environment. Mr. Speaker, the 2026 national budget supports the strengthening of food security, climate resilience, and environmental protection as key to sustainable development. For agriculture specifically, the 2026 national budget has set aside 26.8 billion ZiG for the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water, and Rural Development for the following programs and projects, among others, of course: Agriculture Productive Social Protection Scheme, which is the Fumvuza Intwasa program, rural development 8.0 in industrialization, for irrigation development, for dam construction, livestock production, and procurement of strategic grain reserves. A word on climate change management, the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife has been allocated an amount of 510.2 million ZiG to implement climate change management programs and projects. I now turn to the pillar of job creation, youth entrepreneurship and development, and creative industry and culture. Mr. Speaker, sir, the government is seized with the task of growing the job market to absorb new entrants, as well as creating conditions for youth enterprise development and innovation. The 2026 national budget has set aside 1.7 billion ZiG for the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, Development and Vocation Training towards youth empowerment initiatives and programs, and for capitalization of the Empower Bank. Turning to sports, recreation, arts and culture, under sports, recreation, arts and culture, the national budget has set aside 841.4 million ZiG for the Ministry of Sports, Recreation, Arts and Culture to support activities, including the completion of the outstanding works at the National Sports Stadium, as well as upgrading and construction of other sporting facilities, support the arts and cultural facilities across the country. I now turn to the pillar of social development, gender and social protection. Mr. Speaker, sir, the government seeks to build a just and inclusive society through investing in the quality education and healthcare, among other essential services, in order to foster human capital development, social cohesion, and resilience against poverty and vulnerability. So looking at the health sector, within this pillar, an amount of 30.4 billion ZiG has been allocated to the Ministry of Health and Child Care through the 2026 national budget. This is meant to strengthen primary health care by improving access to quality health care, particularly in rural and underserved areas, and to develop health infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, so there's wonderful progress in terms of renovating some of our infrastructure at the Parerenya group of hospitals. That's underway. And this budget allocation, Mr. Speaker, is in line with the Abuja target of 15% being allocated to the health sector, 15% of total revenue or total budget. Turning to primary and secondary education, the 2026 national budget has set aside 47.4 billion ZiG for the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education. This will go towards employment costs, provision of basic education, infrastructure upgrading and construction, and equipping schools, including those in disadvantaged areas, to ensure that all students have access to education facilities in accordance with international conventions. The picture up there is some equipment from the NMS Health Infrastructure Development Program, which saw us develop resulted in the development of the Harare South Health Facility and Runyararo Health Facility, and also the Cowdrey Park Health Facility. It's one of the programs that we're running under the Ministry of Health. I now turn to the issue of social protection. The 2026 national budget has set aside 12.7 billion ZiG for the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare to cushion the vulnerable with educational fees and medical assistance, as well as improving food security, among others. I now turn to the support we're giving to our veterans of the liberation struggle. The Ministry of Veterans of the Liberation Struggle Affairs has been allocated 1.1 billion ZiG to cover essential needs such as monthly gratuities, medical benefits, educational assistance, funeral grants, as well as for veterans empowerment programs, and ensuring continued support for this important constituency. Let me turn to the issue of women and gender equity promotion. The Ministry of Women's Affairs, Community, Small and Medium Enterprises has been allocated 1.1 billion ZiG towards the following, among other areas, of course: 152.3 million ZiG towards the capitalization of Women's Microfinance Bank. And this is just the beginning. To 70.4 million ZiG for capitalization of the Women's Development Fund. 74.7 million for construction of safe markets for women and children. And finally, 152.3 million ZiG for capitalization of the Small to Medium Enterprises Development Corporation, SMEDCO. Let me turn to the pillar of infrastructure development and housing. Mr. Speaker, sir, the 2026 national budget prioritizes investment in public infrastructure projects with the focus on high economic and high social returns, enhancing trade competitiveness and promoting digitization. Looking at the transport sector, in 2026 national budget, an allocation of 4.6 billion for the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure Development for the rehabilitation and upgrading of roads and upgrading of modern airports has been set aside. Some of the flagship projects include the completion of the Harare-Masingo Bridge Road and the upgrading of the Bulawayo-Victoria Falls Road. This is Manyame and Muchege bridges up on the screen, Mr. Speaker, so you can see there's progress everywhere. Let me mention the energy sector. The Minister of Energy and Power Development has been allocated 330.3 million ZiG to spearhead the implementation of strategic policy instruments and frameworks to guide energy planning and investment. Government will continue to promote investment in the energy sector with particular focus on electricity generation and distribution for both public and private sector, including triple Ps and also the net metering program. On water and sanitation, a total of 1.1 billion ZiG has been set aside to support water and sanitation projects and programs in 2026, with particular focus on Kunzi and Gaishangani dams, as well as borehole drilling programs. That's a picture of the Gaishangani Dam, and there's steady progress. When it comes to housing, the budget has set aside 948.9 million ZiG for the Ministry of National Housing and Social Amenities to enhance the legal and regulatory framework governing land use, housing delivery, and urban planning. These resources will also support investments in both off-site and on-site infrastructure, such as roads, water, sewage, electricity, which are critical enablers for all new housing projects across the country. I think that's the WEDSA District Composite Office, which is one of the projects that is completed, basically. Turning to science, technology, digitalization, innovation, and human capital development, Mr. Speaker, the 2026 national budget has set aside 763.5 million ZiG for the Ministry of Information, Communication Technology, Postal and Courier Services. This will enable the ministry to support and facilitate strategic investments in science, technology, digitization, innovation, and human capital development, which is critical in fostering a knowledge-driven, digitally enabled, and technology-transformed economy. looking at higher and tertiary education, innovation, science and technology. An amount of 10.3 billion ZiG has been set aside for the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development in order to support our Education 5.0 agenda. You can see progress with innovation hubs in Chinhoyi and also at HIT, Harare Institute of Technology. Those are fully functional. These resources will capacitate institutions of higher learning, expand infrastructure requirements, and support innovation hubs, such as one you've seen, and agro-industrial parks in order to strengthen the country's innovation ecosystem. Turning to skills audit and development, the 2026 national budget has set aside resources amounting to 229 million ZiG to support the Ministry of Skills Audit and Development in its mandate to build a competitive, innovative, and adaptive workforce capable of driving Zimbabwe's industrialization, digitization, digital transformation, and inclusive growth. Let me turn to regional development and inclusivity through devolution and decentralization. Mr. Speaker, sir, an allocation of 4.6 billion ZiG has been set aside for the Ministry of Local Government and Public Works for the refurbishment and construction of government buildings for disaster relief, as well as strengthening governance and oversight role of the lower tiers of government. In addition, in compliance with Section 264 and 301 of the Constitution, which requires an allocation of at least 5% of the revenue collections to the lower tiers of government, a total of 14.4 billion ZiG has been set aside for devolution and decentralization in 2026. Turning to good governance, institution building, peace and security, Mr. Speaker said the 2026 budget Mr. Speaker, in 2026, the government seeks to enhance effective governance processes to promote transparency and accountability, as well as creating a conducive environment for inclusive growth and development. Looking at peace and security specifically, the 2026 national budget has set aside 46.8 billion ZiG for the security sector, for hiring and training of personnel, provision of consumables and rations, construction and rehabilitation of staff accommodation, and procurement of operational and conditions of service vehicles. This also includes resources to capitalize the security sector's strategic business units, including the implementation of the military salary concept, as well as a very successful program for landmine clearance. Turning to justice delivery, the Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs has been allocated 6.9 billion ZiG to enhance justice delivery and access, alignment and harmonization of legislation, advancing of decentralization of justice services to provinces and districts, and implementing the intellectual property policy. That's the judicial, commercial court. It's beautiful. On image building and international relations and trade, in line with the national thrust on image building, engagement and re-engagement, the 2026 national budget has set aside 3.9 billion for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade to promote the country's image as a credible investment destination while fostering beneficial partnerships that contribute to sustainable growth and development. Looking at information, publicity, and broadcasting, I think that's the Osaka Expo, Mr. Speaker, said we had a very popular stand and we won. Turning to information, publicity and broadcasting, an amount of 463.1 million ZiG has been set aside for the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services to finance digital migration, transmission network upgrades, and capacity development programs for media institutions and practitioners. This is meant to accelerate digitization within the broadcasting and communication ecosystem through the continued rollout of the ZIM Digital Phase 2 program. I urge members of Parliament to visit Montrose Studios. It's very modern, it's digital. That's where all our indigenous languages are broadcast from, very modern, and want to replicate that at Pockets Hill and everywhere else. Turning to Parliament, as in our ultimate oversight institution for the executive, the 2026 national budget has set aside 3.1 billion ZiG for the Parliament of Zimbabwe to undertake its legislative and oversight role. This includes funding for operations, Constituency Development Fund, CDF, vehicle loan schemes, and other activities that will aid Parliament in the execution of its mandate. Parliament constituency information centers will also be funded in the 2026 national budget. I now turn to the Auditor General's office, Mr. Speaker, sir. In order to undertake its mandate, the Office of the Auditor General requires resources to meet its operational and capital expenditure requirements. In this regard, 764.4 million ZiG has been allocated to the Office of the Auditor General for the 2026 fiscal year. The resources will cater for employment costs, capacity building, digitization, as well as rehabilitation and upgrading of Barrow's House building, which is their head office. I now turn to other independent institutions, Mr. Speaker, sir. For example, the Public Service Commission, the budget of 11.4 billion, Judicial Services Commission, 1.4 billion, Health Service Commission, 305.9 million, Office of the Attorney General, 304.9 million, Council of Chiefs, 200.3 million. This is all ZiG. Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, 256.4 million ZiG. The National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, 545.4 million ZiG. Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, ZAC, 248.1 million ZiG. Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, at 514.8 million ZiG. Zimbabwe Gender Commission at 167.8 million ZiG. Zimbabwe Land Commission, a budget of 245.3 million ZiG. And finally, Zimbabwe Media Commission with a budget of allocation of 159.2 million ZiG. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the matter of ease of doing business, looking at reforms towards the ease of doing business. Mr. Speaker, before I move on to revenue measures, let me take this opportunity to update the House on progress being made thus far, to review levies, fees, charges, in order to improve the environment for doing business. I'm happy to announce that Cabinet has so far approved reforms in the following 5 of 12 sectors. 1, the livestock, dairy, and feedstock manufacturing. This was approved on the 5th of August this year. For the tourism sector, the approval was on the 26th of August. For the transport sector, approval was on the 9th of September. And for the wholesale and retail sectors, the approval was on the 7th of October. And the energy sector approval was basically last week, which is in November. Some of the approved reforms will be gazetted through the finance bill for 2026, while others will be gazetted individually through statutory instruments and other legal reforms by the respective line ministries. So you will see the legal provisions coming through from various angles, but all focusing on the already announced reforms. Government's target is to complete the review of the outstanding 7 sectors by the end of the first quarter of 2026. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to revenue measures. Mr. Speaker, the 26 national budget revenue measures seek to consolidate the gains achieved under the National Development Strategy 1 and lay the foundation for transition to NDS 2. The proposed measures are targeted at supporting productive sectors, provide relief to taxpayers, and minimize avoidance and evasion, whilst ensuring fairness, efficiency, and simplicity in the tax system. I now present a summary of some of the revenue measures. The detail is in the detailed budget statement. Let's look at the issue of broadening the tax base. Royalty on gold. In order to ensure the mining sector contributes a fair share of revenue to the fiscus during periods of commodity price boom, as well as to eliminate arbitrage between categories of miners, I propose to harmonize and review the royalty structure of all gold producers in the following manner. Up on the screen, you can see that the royalty will now be linked to the price level or price category. So with a gold price per ounce of 0 to $1,200 US, the royalty is 3%. From 1,201 to 2,500, the royalty goes up to 5%. For 2,501 and above, the royalty is 10%. This will ensure that a government is able to share on the upside of any price increases. I now turn to an issue of enhancing efficiency in VAT collection, which is about enhancing taxation of e-commerce. Mr. Speaker, I propose to introduce a digital services withholding tax in lieu of existing VAT on imported services for payments made to offshore digital platforms, including e-hailing fees, online content charges, and satellite-based internet access fees. The tax will be withheld by paying agents that include financial institutions. I now turn to an issue of structural transformation, looking at value addition in the cotton sector. Consistent with ongoing improvements in local production capacity of fabrics, I propose to review and align the customs duty rate on selected polyester staples fibers with dyed woolen fabrics of cotton at a rate of 40%, plus $2.5 US or $2.50 per kg in addition to the 40%. I now turn to the issue of manufacturing, of production of gas cylinders, where again the country is making good progress, Mr. Speaker. In order to reduce the cost of producing gas cylinders, thereby stimulating local production, leveraging the playing field between imported and locally manufactured products, I propose to remove customs duty on selected imported raw materials that include steel coils and plates. Let me turn to some tax relief measures, Mr. Speaker. Let me talk about the tax incentives for a 24-hour economy notion. To support the transition towards a 24-hour production economy, I propose to introduce targeted tax incentives for firms operating extended production or service hours in the manufacturing sector, where such operators demonstrate incremental production and revenue thereof. Discussions are ongoing with various stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, on the modalities of the proposed framework, targeting, among others, the following incentives. 1, additional tax deductions on selected expenditure incurred during extended hours or extended operational hours. 2, accelerated wear and tear allowances on plant and equipment used in round-the-clock production cycles. And finally, 3, priority access to import duty concessions for firms that demonstrate capacity for expansion and productivity improvements under the 24-hour economy model. I now turn to the review of the Intermediated Money Transfer Tax, IMTT, otherwise known as the 2% tax. Mr. Speaker, sir, consistent with government commitment to supporting business growth and maintaining fiscal stability, I propose to review the IMTT framework as follows. 1, to reduce IMTT rate on ZIG-denominated transactions from 2% to 1.5% in order to promote use of local currency and lower transactions costs. IMTT on foreign currency transactions will be maintained at 2% for now. Number 2, I propose to designate IMTT as a tax-deductible expense for purposes of corporate income tax and computation. And this applies to both ZIG and US dollar corporate income. Number 3, we want to expand the definition of financial institution for purposes of IMTT to include microfinance institutions. Let me turn to a compensatory issue. Mr. Speaker, sir, this review in IMTT will result in an immediate drop in revenues for the government. So as a compensatory mechanism, I propose that we introduce a small concession to partially compensate for this foregone revenue by increasing VAT by only 0.5% effective from 1 January 2026.
I now turn to an issue of tax deductibility of interest, deposit interest for commercial banks. Mr. Speaker, in order to facilitate mobilization and retention of bank deposits, I propose to allow a tax-deductible expenditure, interest expense payable on such deposits made with financial institutions, subject to appropriate safeguards to prevent abuse, including transfer pricing rules, thin capitalization principles, and anti-base erosion measures. Let me turn to a new business sector, Mr. Speaker, called the Business and Knowledge Process Outsourcing Sector, BPO and KPO. Mr. Speaker, the government recognizes the surge in local investments towards establishment of business and knowledge process outsourcing, BKPO, services, where specialist services are provided to offshore consumers with the potential to significantly contribute towards employment creation, foreign currency generation, and investment in appropriate infrastructure. In order to support investment in the industry, I propose to introduce the following incentives. Suspension of customs duty on the importation of specialized equipment by qualifying business and knowledge process outsourcing operators.
I propose a flat 15% corporate income tax rate in line with the domestic minimum top-up tax provisions, subject to meeting the prescribed conditions. I also propose a capital allowance deduction of 100% in the first year of use or operation. I also propose an exemption from non-resident tax on dividends. I also propose a tax credit of $1,500 per employee per annum on corporate income tax as prescribed under the Youth Employment Tax Incentive YETI framework. So if they employ youthful employees, by a strict definition, there's a tax credit, Mr. Speaker, for those who do so. Finally, a flat tax rate of 15% on skilled, essential expatriate staff. I now turn to, again, a new issue regarding the liberalization of the gold sector. In order to modernize the gold trade legal framework and support the use of gold as an alternative investment asset, I propose to expand the categories of persons who may lawfully possess or deal in gold to include authorized dealers, National Gold Refinery, and individuals in possession of certified gold bars acquired through these institutions or these entities. Furthermore, I propose that holders of certified gold bars subject to the Exchange Control Act be allowed to pledge, exchange, sell, barter, or otherwise transact in these gold bars. This reform will facilitate the introduction of regulated, traceable investment-grade gold products, thereby offering citizens a secure store of value. I now move to the conclusion of the budget speech, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the year 2025 marks the end of the NDS 1 implementation period, with indications that most of the NDS 1 targets were achieved. One critical milestone achieved during the NDS 1 period is the introduction of the local currency, the ZiG, on the 4th of April last year, 2024, which has restored price stability and macroeconomic stability. This was achieved through concerted efforts by both the monetary and fiscal authorities. It is very important to stay the course, therefore, in order to sustain the stability which is critical for the attainment of Vision 2030. This is achievable if all stakeholders have a unit of purpose of economic transformation so that growth is shared through the creation of decent jobs with decent incomes, while vulnerable members of the society are equally taken care of through transparent and credible social protection programs. As the Nobel laureate in economics, Joseph Stiglitz, asserts that sustainable economic growth and shared prosperity requires us to build institutions and policies that are inclusive, resilient, and forward-looking. This national budget embodies that vision, anchoring our progress on fiscal discipline, infrastructure investment, and social empowerment to transform our economy towards achieving the aspirations of Vision 2030 of an upper middle income economy. Mr. Speaker, I finally commend this 2026 national budget to this august House in compliance with the law, and it is accompanied by the following documents: the 2026 national budget statement, the estimates of expenditure, otherwise known as the Blue Book, the finance bill, the appropriation bill, a report to Parliament on public debt, the 2026 Zimbabwe Infrastructure Investment Program, the 2026 Citizens Budget, the Expenditure Arrears Clearance Strategy, which is Domestic Arrears Clearance Strategy, the 2024 Audit Implementation Metrics. For this one, I want Parliament to take note of what government has done in response to queries and issues raised by the Auditor General in the year of 2024. Finally, the 2026 National Gender Budget Statement is also included. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, tinotenda siyabonga twalumbwa.
Thank you. Order. Order. Promotion that leave be granted to bring a bill to make further provision for the revenues and public funds of Zimbabwe and to make provision for ancillary and incidental matters. Is there any debate? The Honorable Minister of Finance. Sorry. Leader.
Thank you.
Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that debate to now.
Thank you. It has been moved that the House do now, the debate do now adjourn. Is there any debate? I put the question that the debate be now adjourned. Those of that opinion will say aye. Those of the contrary opinion will say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is accordingly affirmed, and that the debate is now adjourned to what day, Honorable Leader of Government Business?
To Tuesday, the 9th of December, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Your Excellency, thank you for your attendance. You may now leave.
quite lively environment in a parliament there. But that marks the end of the 2026 budget presentation by the Minister of Finance and Economic Development and Investment Promotion, Professor Mthuli Ncube. Quite a lot of things coming out of that budget presentation that we will be further analyzing. We will now cross over to Eben Mabunda, who is on standby and is on the ground at the Parliament building in Mount Hampton. Over to you, Eben. So we'll be crossing over to Eben in just a moment, but just off the cuff there, for like, I mean, quite a lot of things coming out of the budget. What for you was something to celebrate?
I think there's quite a few things to celebrate. Firstly, we were all quite excited to see that we have surpassed the Abuja Declaration, and I think that was something worth talking about. It's also good to notice that there is deliberate effort to exercise discipline in expenditure. I think the minister tried to gently tell us that first quarter of the year expenditure will happen, but we're going to be cautious. For us to meet these targets, we've got to be frugal and watch what we're doing. I'm curious, Rumbi, if we are surpassing the Abuja Declaration and we've had funding cut from sectors that were supporting our health, that means somewhere in this budget, lots of work has to be done to meet the surpassing, but also to still stay within the confines of our budget. Absolutely,
absolutely. And I mean, I was also very excited to see quite a large amount of money going towards women's activities, the Women's Bank, definitely something to celebrate. Also the tax incentives. So we still also have our guests in the studio, Natasha, wanting to hear from you as well before we cross over to Eben. And of course, we still also have Tatenda and Kudakwashe in the studio. Having listened and watched, of course, that budget, what 2026 has in store for us, what are some of the things that stand out for you? Were your expectations met?
Okay. Well, I think she has alluded on the things that we could celebrate on, but I think in as much as you're celebrating the Abuja, us meeting the Abuja objective, there are certain things that I'm thinking. Allocation is more than just the numbers. It's actually the actual benefit that gets to the people, to the drugs, to the hospitals. Yes, on paper, we have met the 15% allocation, but what about in terms of people actually getting those services next year? That's when we can actually measure and say, yes, we have made the Abuja by allocating 15%, and it is actually used for drugs, for people, for the infrastructure, because it doesn't make sense that we meet the 15% and a basic person goes and they fail to get basic things such as the paracetamol, bandages, injections. You have to buy them outside the hospital facilities and then come to the doctor. So I think the only time I will actually celebrate, maybe with other people who may agree with me, the 15% allocation is when we have actually seen the impact on the people of Zimbabwe, where they are actually celebrating. Doesn't really need to be medical aid based, but just a general citizen being able to access basic services at the hospital, especially those in the rural areas. Another thing I would want to highlight on is how a key industry I think wasn't fully allocated for was the arts, culture, and development.
Creative arts.
Yes, the arts culture industry. I think given what's been happening in Zimbabwe, in support also of the youth development and youth entrepreneurship and youth innovations, I believe there was also need for more allocation towards our arts and culture, which is where most of our youth currently are invested in. We have the content creators, we have the media personalities, we have people that are doing comedy, we have music, we have all these, even recent, like the comic, we have this people who are doing skits, all these people. I think there is need for more allocation in that industry, given we have seen that our society is not only made of the learned people, the educated, the graduates, but also we have other people that I don't think it's supposed to be a luxury to be able to attain certain things like the arts and culture. It's supposed to be exposure to all children, those in the public schools. Because if you go to private schools, these kids actually have certain time where they focus on the academic side of things, and then they have the recreational things that they're doing, the extracurricular activities. But in other sectors, in the public sectors where people are going to public schools, you find that most students, it's a luxury to actually do sports, because our parents keep telling us education is the key. I remember Professor recently mentioned that one of the allocation is to accommodate the new entrants into the industry. That's the new graduates. Yeah. But before we accommodate the new graduates, what about the recent graduates from the previous years? I have students from my own year that I graduated from my undergrad back in 2023 who are not yet employed now. So in as much as we want to make room for all these other, what about those? So I think allocation when it comes to youth innovation, arts and culture should have been increased more. I'm glad he did support, in terms of social services, he did support the women empowerment, which is good. But I still think we have a bit of a more to go. Yeah. And also thank you for this tax incentive in quotes, yes. Because then we're still paying it via VAT. I'm still the same person who's paying that VAT when I go and buy goods in the store, when I go and access any services. The company is always, it will be a burden on me in as much as you may say, I have reduced the transaction costs. Thank you.
All right, quite interesting. So there's room for improvement, according to Natasha. Tatenda, let's come to you. What did you make of the budget, of the 2026 budget?
Okay. Listening to the Honorable Minister speaking, I think there are quite a number of issues that we need to look at. Maybe I was speaking to my fellow colleague Kuda to say maybe the maths jammed me. I'm yet to figure out if the 15% is actually correct, given that we are talking of 30.4 billion allocated to the health sector versus a figure which I heard about revenue collection. But when I did my own maths, it didn't tally to 15%.
What did you come up with when you
calculated? I think
around 12%. Around 12%.
Yes. So I think it's something that I thought maybe I will need to look into when I get the actual figures. Then, you know what? When you reflect on these issues, and maybe it's because he was presenting something which is more of a summary, we would then maybe give more analysis or maybe a better picture when you get the whole presentation. But listening to him talking about, I think when he started, I had a figure of around, I think it was, our public debt was estimated around 21.5 billion. But when he reported, I think I had a 23.4 billion. That's something which is very worrisome. Regardless of, yes, we rebased the GDP, so he was talking about 47 point something. But that alone speaks volumes in terms of the impact that it is going to have, especially for businesses. There's that projection that going into 2026, the global interest rates are going to go down. But as a country, when we are talking of 23.4 billion public debt, that gives you a negative risk in terms of or rating in terms of the risk. When you look at maybe either investors or creditors who then will be offering money. So I think all those are some of the issues that we have to look into. The minister did not talk something about the tax brackets. Maybe we'll get the numbers when you go to the actual budget. So if it had been maintained, and they're talking of a VAT increase of 0.5%, you just said just 0.5%, but that's a significant amount when it comes to the low income earners, which I believe the greater percentage of our population. You talk of the GDP rebasing and that increase to say, I think you talked about we rebased and we are having a GDP per capita of around 3,200 per person. Yeah. But the honest truth of it, when you then dissect or into the numbers, try to see what percentage of people, because to say 3,000 is different from Kuda having 3,000, myself having 3,000, and yourself having 3,000. Yeah. But when you look on the issues of inequality, poverty, especially inequality rates, then you discover that maybe the greater part of what we are reporting is with the 10%, top 10% of the Zimbabweans. Then what about the 90%? So that's something that we have to reflect on and try to see how best can we improve. When you are talking of then attaining Vision 2030, it's something that
it seems we're already there, isn't it?
With these numbers, it seems we are already there. But when you do the calculations, we are coming from a 6.6% or maybe 6% projection, and in 2026 we are looking at 5%. But when you do the numbers, I think we need to do a double-digit growth if we are then to attain 2030 vision of an upper middle income economy. So yeah, I think those were just my quick reflections to say. I would say I don't expect much change going into 2026. We will maintain this moderate or maybe this current status quo that we are experiencing in 2025. In the ease of doing business, I think we've heard about agriculture or the agricultural sector. It's one thing to have something being said to say that we are going to do this. Then it's another thing to actually experience it and see the real impact in the economy. When you go out there, speak to those who are in the formal sector or maybe the formal side of doing business. I think things have not yet changed. Maybe based on what we are receiving from the policymakers. So I think for now I can rest it there and say those are my few reflections based on what we've learned from the Honourable Minister.
I think you're just living frugally on surprise there, clearly, when it comes to the budget. Could I share your highlights maybe coming out of the presentation as we continue to unpack and dissect all the various things that came out of the 2026 national budget?
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I think we have been all on tenterhooks waiting anxiously for the budget. And for someone like myself, being an analyst, I was just trying to look if the fiscal front will align or will speak the same language with the monetary front. Because I'm sure we have seen for the greater part of this year, the RBZ is firm on de-dollarization, right? And on them speeding up the process to which ZIG is being used, or the utility of the ZIG in our country. But as we look at things, ZIM is largely an informal environment. So I'm sure even on the pre-budget, when it was done in Bulawayo, when a lot of people were talking about the IMT tax being reduced, it was likely and largely looking at this front. Because if we are to look at the informal sector, there is no incentive for anyone to want to conduct transactions in the digital platform or the digital framework. A person will just transact in cash. You are not subject to
ensuring that the budget was, of course, people-friendly in that particular regard.
Our allocations to health, to education, both at lower tiers and upper tiers, really speaks to our budget being people-oriented. These are the critical social sectors that develop our human capital, that look after our human capital. We want to make sure that these sectors are appropriately catered for in our budget, and that's what we've done. This is a people-centered budget. If we also add what we've allocated towards both productive social protection and the unconditional social protection in the form of Fumvudza, Intwasa programs and other programs, you certainly see that the bulk of our budget is focusing on the social sector. It is definitely people-oriented.
Right, and of course, crucial to that has been the element of the reviews that have been made in terms of the cost of doing business to the Zimbabwean economy, of course tied to the GDP projection of about 5% for 2026. May you speak to that against the context of the NDS2?
Thank you very much. His Excellency late this morning launched NDS2, our National Development Strategy 2, to cover the period 2026 to 2030, to take us to upper middle income status. We have set a base to drive growth towards that 5% target by lowering the cost of doing business. So that businesses can grow, they can employ more of our citizens, employ the youth, and just drive a growth. This is very important because we can only support our social programs, development programs, by taxing growth, by sharing on the upside of growth. So it's important to support growth as we go forward. And we feel that a 5% target is achievable. In the last 5 years, within the NDS1, we've achieved an average growth rate of 5.6%. Surely we will make it towards the 5% target. That shouldn't be impossible.
A GDP of 52 billion United States dollars, and yet many contend that is not translated to its physical equivalents in as far as the pockets of the individuals operating in this economy. How do you respond to that?
You know what? In any economy, there's inequality. There are some who have more resources than others. In other words, they have a bigger share of the GDP than others. It's a normal situation in a mixed economies such as ours, in an eclectic economy such as ours. You'll have those who have lower income, those who have higher income. But we work on averages. So when we say that the average gross national income per capita per person is $3,200, that is correct, statistically and mathematically, it is correct. But that's the average. That's the income per year, not per month, not per day, per year. So if you want to translate that then to per year, or rather per day, then you have to divide that by the number of days in a year. So that translates to the order of just above $8 per person per day. That's the average. There are some who have far less than that level of income. Some who have far higher. Looking at all my friends here who are journalists, I don't want to benchmark you on that scale, but I suspect you are all have at least $1 a day to spend. So you're way above the poverty, extreme poverty levels. So look, what's important is that economies must grow, even if there is inequality. Why? Because good growth is also sells an economy, sells a country to both local and global investors. When you see an economy growing very strongly, you want to invest there, especially if they're like Zimbabwe with an educated population, very articulate people, a high endowment in terms of natural resources, minerals, both above and below the ground. Above the ground, fertile lands and agriculture. You look at all of that plus all the other opportunities. You say, I want to go there. There's high growth, wonderful people, great endowment of natural resources. It sells the country. You haven't even said anything about inequality, which I mentioned earlier. I haven't said anything. But those then drive the growth that you need overall to then reduce inequality, the spread of this uneven distribution of wealth, which you achieved through policies. That's why when we look at taxation, we try to make it as fair as possible. Right. And then when we look at things like social protection programs, when we say we want to protect the vulnerable, that is again is a distribution mechanism. You see what I'm talking about? So what's important is to drive that growth and then use policies to distribute the wealth around.
Right. You mentioned the aspect.
Because we've seen that MDAs in the past, they've been complaining that the money is not there. Is there going to be money in your fiscal to distribute to the MDAs?
First of all, let me explain the disbursement delays. The biggest driver is what we've termed in Treasury over-contracting, where MDAs or ministries, they love their work, they love their projects, then they over-contract in the building of roads, of dams, of various service providers, over-contracting well above their own budget. There's also over-contracting in terms of use of vehicles, vehicle hiring, some of our biggest expenses. So all of that then has created arrears, which areas then starve critical projects of necessary cash, because we're trying to clear all the arrears. That's the issue. But also the reason why some of them were, by the way, doing the over-contracting and also overpricing, I must say, was because of the instability of the Zimbabwe dollar. So what they were doing, these contractors, they would add another 50% or 200% because they thought the Zim dollar would fall, they would lose value. So they then do this overpricing. But now things are different. So going forward with a stable ZiG, certainly there shouldn't be overpricing on the back of speculative predictions on the currency value. There shouldn't be that. The ZiG is stable. But number two, we've decided now to front-load cash considerations ahead of budget releases. All this time we've been doing budget releases, but without the necessary cash for follow-through. In the end, then the cash doesn't show up. Then, voila, we then have a delay. We're now going to do it the other way around. Match the budget release to the cash available. So those two things alone, plus the circulars that we've issued to say no MDA shall contract beyond $2 million US in value for any contract without the express consent of Treasury in writing. We want some order and it shall be so. So things will improve. I'm very optimistic. Things will improve going forward.
Right, Minister, I've got to pick your mind on the subject of the taxes. The 2% tax, the IMTT, has been a contentious one. You reduced it by a margin of 0.5%. At the same time, VAT has been increased by a similar margin of 0.5%. Is there relief when you look at it from that perspective?
Well, you know what? The IMTT impacts companies and individuals in different ways. So we've listened to Zimbabweans. They've said they want IMTT to be reviewed downwards. Others have even said, Minister, get rid of it. It is that extreme. So we've listened to those voices. We've reduced it. But I know that by reducing it, now government is underfunded. What do we do? That's why I said, can we tolerate a small, modest 0.5% increase in VAT? Other countries are way higher than Zimbabwe. Surely 0.5% can be managed. So then we can fund government programs. That's all.
Well, Minister, that suffices. Just one more element, the aspect of the gold taxes, 2.5 per ounce, of course, attracting a 10% degree of royalty. Some would perhaps contend that perhaps could be somewhat punitive where some of our mining companies are concerned. What's the sentiment? What inspired that particular decision as we wrap up?
As government, we're just sharing on the upside of the increase in the gold price. Gold price, the last time you guys bought your gold coins, most of you at Tunya, the gold price was $2,000 US per ounce. Today, it is closer to 4,500, right? So government, meanwhile, royalties have stayed low, you know. We have not shared in the upside. And remember, this is not money for government, it's not for civil servants. It's for the citizens, it's for their programs. So we want to share on the upside. So that's why we've come up with that gradation in terms of royalties, 3%, 5%, 10%. We think it is fair.
Fair enough. Minister, thank you for speaking to ZTM Prime and to members of the Fourth Estate.
Thank you.
Much
Thank you
appreciated. Well, of course, the Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion, Professor Mthuli Ncube, speaking to us on the inspiration behind what has formed the core of the 2026 national budget. Some of the key highlights there, that the economy is expected to grow by 5% in 2026 from 6.6% in 2025, as well a GDP of 52 billion United States dollars, as of course has been presented by the Minister of Finance, as well as of course attested to by the country's official statistical agency. Just perhaps to highlight some of the key allocations, we have noticed that there have been some key disbursements that have gone toward social protection. To highlight allocations to the Ministry of Health, 30 billion zig there, and about 15% of the fiscus, translating to the 15% in line with the Abuja Declaration. And now I'm joined in conversation by Mr. Denford Mutashu, who is the president of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Retailers and of course represents the industry at large. Mr. Mutashu, thank you for speaking to ZTN Prime. What is your sentiment with regards the budget that's been presented from a business perspective?
I think it has captured a number of issues that we contributed to the ministry through the pre-budget consultations. For example, the issue of aligning the ease and cost of doing business reforms with the law. The minister announced that he's going to do that through the Finance Act, as well as, of course, statutory instruments that will come out through various ministries. We are also happy that IMTT in ZIG has been reduced from 2% to 1.5%. We are definitely positive that it will stimulate transacting in the local currency as it is stabilized. Of course, it's supported by a macroeconomic stability that the country has been enjoying.
Right. How worried are you about the increase in the VAT from 15% to 15.5%?
Definitely, it's a compensatory, strategy, a compensatory measure, because reducing the IMTT by, 0.5%. Certainly, government requires revenue for it to actually spearhead most of the developmental projects and infrastructure development that we have seen in the country. Remember, the Bulawayo Victoria Falls road is already under construction, and we need revenue towards that. And yes, broadening the tax base is also something that is very key. We will see the measures also in trying to formalize the economy and bring into the fold the informal sector so that it can also continuously contribute towards revenue generation.
There are some pronouncements that were made again by Treasury several weeks back that indicated a streamlining in terms of the costs for retailers operating in this economy. And yet there is the legal aspect of that. What is your sentiment to that? Because this is what's been said on paper, but it has not yet translated to its physical equivalence by means of enactment. Now that the budget has been presented, what are your expectations?
I think the minister was clear by indicating that it is certainly going to be addressed by the Finance Act, and also various line ministries will also be empowered with statutory instruments that will address the issue, because it is a critical matter. Because right now the cycle of taxes, cycle of licenses has elapsed. It elapses around November, December, and a lot of companies right now are renewing their licenses. And of course, most local authorities are not aligned. They are continuing to charge in the previous regime, license regime, and a lot of outcry has been realized from various, especially widely networked big brands and shops who have got say more than 50% across the country. So I think it is that alignment is urgent, that alignment has been addressed, but we wish that the statutory instrument and also the Finance Act addressing the matter has got to be very, very urgent.
Right. Lastly, the stabilization in terms of the ZiG that's been experienced for several months now, with indications of that inflation further waning going on from this particular point. What does that mean for the country's retail sector?
I think it remains very promising. We are optimistic because that stabilization of the local currency is anchored on building up of our national reserves that are currently above 900 million, and that is actually a reality because this is a practical build up of these reserves to support and buttress the exchange rate stability. But we're also quite happy that the minister has touched a number of other areas in order to play a balancing act in a very difficult situation where revenue generation has actually been very difficult. We call upon businesses to also voluntarily contribute towards taxation, tax payment through the legal channels and transacting through the legal channels. We also hope that the issue of the the counterfeit products that are actually affecting production is certainly going to be addressed through the Finance Act, because we need some punishing measures for those that are producing and selling or offering for distribution those counterfeit products, because they're affecting everybody. They're affecting almost all our big brands that are actually international brands that are all sought after across the globe.
Sir, thank you for speaking.
Thank you.
To ZTN Prime. Much appreciated, of course. That is Mr. Denford Mutashu, the president of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Retailers, speaking to us on what the budget means for the country's retail sector and what it means for Zimbabwe's industry going forward, and of course advancing from this particular phase, and of course ushering us into the start of the NDS2, and of course much to look forward to, much to anticipate as we continue to look forward to further conversations right here at Mount Hampton, where it is that the budget, the 2026 budget, has been presented, and earlier on there was the presentation of the National Development Strategy 2, or rather the launch by His Excellency the President, speaking to the trajectory, the economic trajectory that Zimbabwe will be taking between 2026 and 2030. We are looking forward to be again again engaging in conversation with the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Dr. George Guvamatanga, again, who is also on standby, and much to decipher, much to look into, some reforms from a tax perspective that would be of particular interest to the advancement of the economy from this particular trajectory. A shift or a move made where the country's royalties are actually concerned, perhaps to highlight just how that where gold is concerned, from a threshold of $2,500 per ounce, that will attract a 10% of course tax and royalty figure where the country's resources are concerned. Well, over to you back at the studio.
Thank you so much, Eben, for that, and quite interesting to hear sentiments there from the Minister of Finance as well as Denford Mutashu, representing Confederation of Zimbabwe Retailers. Bring it back in the studio. I still am here with Folake, my co-host, as well as our analysts. Maybe just garnering your closing remarks around what has been presented, what to look forward to, as well as maybe, you know, areas of concern that may need revisiting. Natasha.
Okay, I think just in closing remarks, I would like to mention, just to emphasize and also be celebrating that from what the Honorable Minister mentioned, Professor Mtuli, is that there's a serious commitment in stabilizing the macroeconomic and also restoration of public confidence in fiscal management. This is where we're also mentioning about fiscal discipline, where we're saying the government is also committed to spending what they have, instead of spending and then having to find ways of financing those through taxation, like we did when he mentioned the budget last year. So that's something to commend on what he had mentioned. But another area of interest for me would be diaspora remittances, where I think we should move from them being just remittances, but they're actually channeled into long-term financial development, where we have investments, diaspora bonds, we have diaspora investments, we have housing schemes, whereby these people that are in the diaspora are able to invest back here at home, and it's actually able to also fund other things instead of just us recording it as a remittance, but fully developing our financial system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Coming to you, Jatinder, your closing reflection.
Yeah, thank you. One positive thing that I took from his presentation is to do with the cash budgeting, where I think for more than a decade, we have had a situation where most ministries were complaining that either they get these disbursements at the tail end of the year, and they can't fulfill what they're expected to do. So if then there's that narrative or shift in narrative to say we are now having a budget where these allocations are not, they are not just numbers being said, but the ministries will then be funded accordingly based on the allocation. I think that's one quick positive that we took from this. But also then looking on the other issues, giving 0.5, taking away 0.5, somehow it will always twinkle down, especially to those the low income earners. It will have an impact in terms of just like I highlighted, that we are yet to maybe have an analysis to say if there are changes in terms of the income brackets. If there are no changes, then 15.5 VAT, it might seem a 0.5%, but definitely to have an impact in terms of the disposable income. I'll also emphasize on the public debt. It's something that will constrain, especially be the private sector or the government, in terms of accessing finances. He mentioned that we are projecting that the interest rates at global level are going to decrease, but accessing that cheap finance is going to be a tough also because of the rate at which our public debt is ballooning. I tend to be ignorant when he talked about, I think that 23.4 billion. I'm not sure whether it incorporates what is owed to the exporters, because I think the exporters, there's a huge amount. The last time I heard it was around 4 billion SIG, which was yet to be paid. And when you add that means our domestic debt is also ballooning, and that will create challenges in terms of us maybe as an economy performing going forward.
Thank you so much.
I'll rest on that.
Thank you. Could I question closing remarks?
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll just make a commentary on gold. Looking at the 9 months from January to September, we saw the total exports of gold ballooning from 1.1 billion USD to around over 1.9 billion USD. So seeing that linking the royalty on gold on the price, clearly as an analyst I know why the minister had to do so. And initially, as we started 2025, the projections were around 40 tons of gold for the year. But for that 9-month period, I'm sure we have reached around 33 tons. But what's more notable from that 33 tons is 24 tons is coming from the small scale miners. And then the large scale miners, they contributed the remaining 8.5, which is actually below what they were able to hand over last year, which was around 9.5. So seeing a decline in actually the gold that is being handed over to Fidelity from the large scale miners, we can clearly see that there are some structural issues in the sector. And if I look at the allocated amount in the mining sector of 789 million, and if we were to use perhaps maybe a rate of 30, that's something below 30 million. So in my view, I don't see, a lot of attention being placed on the sector as a whole and investments towards addressing some of these structural issues. So moving on to 2026, even meeting that projection of 45 tons for this year, I don't foresee that taking place. Because we're talking of small scale miners. These are the people who can actually evade taxes as much as possible. So I foresee even our borders are porous. So I foresee a lot of people perhaps circumventing that tax base that is linked towards the price of gold. But in overall, it might seem as if I don't have the positives that I've seen.
I'm sure there's one in there.
There are some of them that I've seen. Maybe perhaps just the allocation that they've placed on agriculture. In my view, it was a fair amount that they've allocated. And even also addressing the issues to do with the climatic issues. It's quite key and poignant. Why I'm saying so? Because if we look at 2024, agriculture was down by around negative 21%. Why? Simply because of climatic issues. So moving forward, we need to make sure that whatever happens, these issues are addressed, because they also have a ripple and multiplier effect, even in the manufacturing sector. All those agro-processing manufacturing industries, whether it be the beverages manufacturing, such as Deot and whatever. So that's one of the key positive things that I can say I've taken from the budget.
Absolutely, quite a mixed bag there, but we would like to thank our analysts for coming through and sharing their views. Kudakwashe Taimo, Tatenda Nyachega, and Natasha Mutasa. Thank you so much, and do stay tuned. There is more to come as we continue to dissect the 2026 national budget.
Harare. Tune into the beat.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, your source for news, business, sports, fashion, and more.
Experience the pulse of Harare's culture and lifestyle.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, Harare's top radio station.
Join the conversation with Zimbabwe's top personalities.
Subscribe now for fresh and infotainment content daily.
Capital 100.4 FM, Harare's heartbeat.
Catch exclusive interviews every weekday for candid, exciting, and thought-provoking conversations with your host, Erika Ndoro.
We talk about arts, we can talk about sports, we can even talk about politics, and sometimes we venture into a nice guitaristic play. The one story where you can't get out of your head. Wakatarisa munhu so Erika, like where you are sitting. Ndozongokona bata face so pasina munhu.
Wakasiya music yako yo afro chakuti ndo music manje no yeMzimbabwe.
And I'm sure they're still saying the same thing now.
Yeah, so Shona kana kuti Chindevere kana mumwe mutaure muno muZimbabwe ndiwe iwewe. Ndiwo rupawo rwako. Ndicho chidadiso chako.
Catch me, Erika Ndoro, right here on ZTN Prime every single Monday at 7 p.m. whilst we get exclusive.
They call me Racer X, or in this case, Racer J. All right.
Put your seatbelt on.
Didn't graduate. I guess I blew it.
You couldn't advise him anything. He would just look at you and say, so who do you think you are?
We were just like really spoiled.
And then they just give me the receipt and I'd pay.
The guy walks in one day and then he says that he wants to make a movie.
He was blowing the money.
There was just like this habit that he had where as soon as he got money, it was gone.
I just didn't have the skills or the experience.
This money, I could see it disappear so fast.
Catch exclusive interviews every weekday for candid, exciting, and thought-provoking conversations with your host, Erika Ndoro.
We talk about arts, we can talk about sports, we can even talk about politics, and sometimes we venture into a nice guitaristic play.
The one story where you can't get out of your head. Wakatarisa munhu so Erika like where you are sitting. Ndozongokona bata face so pasina munhu.
Wakasiya music yako iyo afro chakuti ndo music manje yemuZimbabwe.
And I'm sure they're still saying the same thing now.
Yeah, so
Shona kana kuti chindevere kana mumwe mutauri muno muZimbabwe ndiwe iwewe. Ndiwo rupawo rwako. Ndicho chidadiso chako.
Catch me, Erika Ndoro, right here on ZTN Prime every single Monday at 7 p.m. whilst we get exclusive.
Harare. Tune into the beat.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, your source for news, business, sports, fashion, and more.
Experience the pulse of Harare's culture and lifestyle.
Capitalk 100.4 FM, Harare's top radio station.
Join the conversation with Zimbabwe's top personalities.
Subscribe now for fresh and infotainment content daily.
Capital 100.4 FM, Harare's heartbeat.
Thank you so much for staying with us. We are still dissecting, analyzing, and unpacking the just presented national budget for the year 2026. And now joining us in the studio, we have Mishek Ugaro, Vice President of the Zimbabwe Economic Society, as well as Agnes Magunje, Informal Traders Empowerment Association Chairperson. It is a good afternoon to you, Mishek. Hello and welcome.
Thanks. Good afternoon.
And good afternoon to you, Agnes. Hello and welcome.
Good afternoon and thank you for having me.
To start the conversation, or perhaps let me, gather your views on the budget that has been presented. Did it meet your expectations? What areas of concern can you highlight?
I don't think I have a lot of areas of concern. If you had access to something I presented last week at the Zimbabwe Employers Confederation in Kadoma, I actually talked of a budget of about $10 billion, which is precisely what has been given today. It is a 290 billion ZIG. I also spoke of the impossibility of removing the IMTT tax, because realistically, the IMTT tax is contributing 6% of revenues. Removing it means removing 6% from the budget, and it means reducing government expenditures, which means reducing on all the expectations that we have. So I'm not surprised that the minister has recovered that 0.5% by putting it at VAT. I had actually expected him to not shift it at all. But he said that he acceded to the people's request to reduce the IMTT. So what it will do, though, is the what it will do is the recovery through VAT actually is an over recovery by my calculations, because it's not on a one-to-one basis. The reduction of 0.5% in IMTT is not equal to an increase in VAT at 0.5%. 0.5% in VAT is more than the reduction in an IMTT. So that's a bit of a negative. But otherwise, I'm also happy with the attempt to increase expenditure on health. I think by my calculations, it's coming to about 11% of the budget. So that's moving towards the Abuja declaration. But what caught my attention, in Kadoma last week, I spoke of the outstanding debt to contractors of $600 million. And the minister explained that it is due to what he called over-contracting by MDAs. It is an area of concern for me because it gave me the impression that MDAs are contracting above what has been budgeted for. And therefore, they're not getting the drawdowns from the finance because they're spending above what has been contracted for. And he said that the solution now is that they have instituted the regulation that no MDA will enter into contract of $2 million or more without the express written approval from the Minister of Finance as a measure of control. Because that shows me an element of indiscipline in the MDAs, if we are to go by the minister's statement, which is something we must jealously guard against, because what has been happening now, we're experiencing stability. Budget deficit is well under control, albeit with that outstanding debt which has not been paid. So by and large, I think the minister was spot on. He acceded to the reduction in IMTT, but cleverly recovered it in VAT. He mentioned another item which excited me quite a lot. There is an incentive to the banking sector now for them to pay interest to depositors. There's a tax rebate that he mentioned. I'm yet to go through the actual statement, but I heard him mentioning that the banks will be able to claim back some tax on the interest expense they give to depositors. And he actually mentioned that he hopes it won't be abused. I also hope that banks will actually pay the interest to depositors and claim it from Zimra without really abusing it. So I think that is a very telling statement which we need. It's encouraging. Thank you.
It sounds like you were spot on with the national budget from what you were saying, Mishik. But I'm curious, do you feel as we are moving from NDS 1 to NDS 2, as if this new budget is reflecting lessons we learned from NDS 1?
I think it is. If you look what he said in there about putting this control on the expenditure patterns of the MDAs, it shows that he's really genuinely putting a clamp on the government spending what has been budgeted for. In NDS 1, an earlier part of the NDS 1, the first 3 years, we were having challenges in exchange rate instability because there was always an issue of contractors being paid and then pushing the exchange rate. So this has not happened this time, and this control which he has put to say no one spends more than 2 million without Treasury's express approval is a lesson. Is actually drawing from what was happening in the first part of NDS1, which he eventually controlled towards the end. Hence this stability we are experiencing.
It's also interesting to see, Rumbi, how there is celebration in increase in our health budget, but there's also questions around that allocation. Supposing it is realistic and that we are surpassing this declaration, do you think our current healthcare systems are enough for us to see and realize, for us as everyday people, the changes and what this 30 billion might actually do?
I am aware of the government's Ministry of Health's plans in terms of health services delivery. They plan to have a doctor in each district, for example, of the country. So each district will have a doctor. That's part of their social plan. And I think it's being catered for in this allocation. They're taking, the minister actually spoke of hospitals and increase in hospitals and clinics. It's part of the Ministry of Health's plan for these next 5 years. So I believe it. I think it's actually provided for it to be done. So for now, I have every reason to think it is possible. I happen to also sit in the National Tripartite Negotiating Forum. And what he has done is fulfillment of the social negotiations happening in the social dialogue platform. That's why I believe it. What we need to do is to monitor its implementation.
It's quite positive that as you're saying, is reflective of discussions that were happening, at that tripartite party level. But Agnes, also bring you into the conversation now. What do you make of the budget, particularly those that are sector specific to the informal trader constituency that you represent?
Okay, I think firstly, I would like to concur with my brother here, to say reducing the IMMT and bringing the VAT on that 0.5, it's really going back to the already suffering people who are trying to say, this budget was going to bring change, but the change that is bringing to the ordinary person is it's more weight on the ordinary person. I think the budget is focused more on development on the top tier of the economy, where you are seeing taxes for equipment and importation of heavy equipment and being scraped off completely, and only sticking to that tax for the duties, maybe 15% of the VAT, which is all that they are going to pay. So you realize that the companies, the development of industry is actually given a leeway to really survive and to thrive, but forgetting that we also need to make sure that even when we are looking at creating the middle class economy by 2030, we should be cognizant where it's coming from. Where is the gap that is going to bridge that middle class economy? Because once we destroy now the grassroots, it means we are only going to be left with the top being full of cream, and yet the bottom is just filled with water. So when we also look at the issue of the reduction of, let me say, the increase in the women's budget, when we look at
the women's bank,
the women's bank, and how it just looks like we are just capacitating, but it is the stringent measures of accessing that money to the same people who are supposed to have that money to transform them, the collateral that is needed, all those things. So giving really capacitating it should also go with the policy of saying how flexible is that money going to be, how accessible is it going to be to the women who really need it for the transformation that is needed in those areas. And then when we also look at, when we're looking at issues of the text that he proposes for social media, for all these other platforms and whatnot, when we're looking at innovation and saying we want to move a niche to that, a sector, we have to be looking at the new crop that we have, the Gen Zs. What kind of employment are we saying we want to create for them? They are the people who have become the innovators. So if this is the platform where they are going to be really employed, and we are now tightening it and putting all these other taxes where they're going to be paying, you have to pay for this, and I think it's going to also make it very because already data is expensive for us to access. So looking at innovation, the affordability of data, and the more taxes that are also going to be added to that, I think it's falling away. And then also looking at issues of creating employment for the youth, I think there is very little that is being done in enabling them to say, there are more spaces, there's more creativity where they can then showcase their skills, where they can even develop, where they can also be captured and be put to full use. If we look at sports development now, and how important it is and how expensive sporting has become, I think it is also very crucial to have put more in order of creating more sporting facilities, development, infrastructural development, looking at areas where sports and recreational sectors would be really, revived. We're looking at how it is also going to address the issue of drug and substance abuse, how it's also going to address the unemployment issue, especially for youth, because we know a lot of them are interested in sports. We have a lot of the young people who would also want to play football, but I think the investment is not there yet in those areas where we are going to see in employment being created in a different way, because I think our youth have developed from our mindset, they've become more innovative. So those are the platforms that we should be looking at and saying, how then do we incentivize them to put more effort in being in those spaces, and to also make sure that they are more occupied in those spaces than them being idle and getting up to really the mess. And in the informal sector, I think we feel like that sector has completely been ignored. I feel the budget is really looking more at capacitating the bigger guys, and forgetting that the bigger guys would only be strengthened when the younger companies are also given an opportunity of development, of progressing. I think the taxes, yes, we hear they are there and they've been talked about, but I don't know whether they are going to be really be implemented. We're going to really see them being put to practice, because we hear these have been cut, but on the ground it's like simply you are cutting a piece of cloth from the top of your dress, but yet you want to put it onto the bottom. So the top will remain cut, but the bottom is, So I think there is no proper balance, but we are glad that there's been changes, and there's been measures that are put in place in issues of health. We would also like issues of education, where it has to really spread out. The devolution should be very inclusive, to say, it has to hit the roots, where schools in Slobela, in Kai, also access internet access, where they also have teachers' needs also being really looked into, because we look at the needs of teachers in cities, and then the teachers who are in those rural areas. The kids in the rural areas are not progressing at the same level as the students that we have in cities. So it is very crucial to say that education fund should be very specific to say where is it being structured to, so we can monitor and evaluate and see that, in these areas where this was also invested, this is the change. The schools that we want to see built, they also have to go deep down to the grassroots, and then that is when we can really realize the effects and the impact of how this education, the allocation that has been made for education can really bring the transformation that we need to see. Thank you.
Sorry, Agnes, I'm just curious. In the last few weeks, we've seen the president signing agreements with Zambia. He's just come back from Mozambique, and we've just come from celebrating our Africa Industrialization Week. Now, looking at the budget with what the minister has declared around incentives, particularly for small traders, around us being productive 24 hours a day. Looking at those changes, do you feel as a small trader that it will actually encourage someone who's an SME, someone who wants to get into business, to then engage with these partnerships that we are building regionally?
Definitely. I've said many times that, the informal sector has really grown because it is a symptom of lack of employment. So the 24-hour service sector I think that actually will create more jobs. And you'd find that people who are in the informal sector, because they are just looking for a living or just trying to make a living, will be captured in that space where, if production really increases, if industry really revives, it means there will be more job creation. The more productive we become, the more we can also consume all the other, the other docile businesses. So I feel even our sector will also transform, because production is also dependent on demand. So once we know that we have secured the issues of demand, then we know that the production is also going to increase. And once that increases, I think that is where we are going to see the creation of the middle income economy, because then it just falls into place automatically, because it's what you are earning and it's where it's placing you and it's how productive you become. So it becomes a cycle. So once the chain is complete, then it means we are jump started to the next level. So we are really excited about this, and we see that it is intentional, that the growth that we want to see is also being catered for. So for us, we're excited. We don't want our people to continuously be doing business informally. We would want those who have the qualifications, those who have the need, who also need the support, who feel they've just been living from hand to mouth, to also be consumed in the larger industry, so that the production also increases, the country develops, the economy also changes, and then the impact is also felt, cross-cutting. So I think it's a good development.
Fantastic. Misha, coming to you, just for your closing remarks, looking ahead at the year to come, what needs to happen in order for the budget to be fulfilled completely, and to see that all sectors receive a fair share or are capacitated going into NDS2 and beyond?
Yeah, I'll start by perhaps advising my sister here that personally I don't have anyone I call informal sector. I'm on record in calling them SMEs, because this is where the growth should actually come from. This is the sector that we should capacitate and enhance and harness and make them grow by encouraging them to not think that they're informal, but to know that they're small enterprises, they're small establishments that actually are a seed of growth for the future. So talking to the budget, I think that the minister tried to, to her point, that they think that it's only the big players that are being catered for. And indeed, the minister announced on the budget for the Ministry of Industry and Commerce that they're being capacitated to, I think it's a fund, I have to read the actual wording of what he said, that will be given to manufacturers or companies to try and improve their capacity. But I don't think I had anything to do with the small enterprises.
Micro even.
The micro enterprises. Maybe it's there. When I read, I will be looking out for that. Because I think as the country has actually adopted what is called a formalization strategy. And that is the strategy that the country is going to use to harness the small players and bring them into the value chains, link them up with the big players. They become part of the suppliers in production for the big players. So those linkages are critical. But also, I think that the presentation, I cannot avoid this one, of the launch of the NDS1, NDS2 document. And she talked about it. Objective number 6 is devolution and development or shared development of the economy. So in that, as an objective, what it means is that this is where the rural industrialization policy falls, where the government will go a long way towards promoting rural industry. So if in Mutoko you grow tomatoes and everything, they put up the factory to value add to factory in Mutoko. On the valley, they do bananas, avocado, everything. They put the factories there. This is devolution, and a fund is being put. And I think the minister actually spoke to an amount being allocated to devolution, which is very important. I think that is the way that we are going to share the growth and the benefits of all the outcomes of these two development strategies that we have adopted.
Thank you so much. Agnes, your closing remarks going forward into a new transitionary document for the economy, as well as looking at some of the issues laid bare in the 2026 budget.
I want to actually, congratulate our government, because it looks like we are on a positive trajectory where, yes, it's not where we would want things to be as yet, but there is a lot of intention of really transforming, and especially when it comes to issues of expenditure, where the minister clearly stated, the new reforms in government expenditure. We would love to see, all that has been said really coming to shape. We would want to see the positive results. We don't want to get to a point whereby we are taking measures of compensating, where we are saying we are compensating for this. The minister made it clear that some of these exorbitant figures that have been, being put on tenders and whatnot were because of the expected inflation rate going up. So now we want to see intentional budgets. We want to see budgets that are monitored, because with budgets they must be specific to timeline, timeframes, and expected outcomes. So we want measurable performance-based budgets, whereby everyone who has been allocated is supposed to be accountable, and we want to see more transparency. We want to be able to see tangible results, so that we see the transformation that we expect. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our guests analyzing the 2026 budget, and quite a lot to look forward to. So allow us to thank Mishek Ugaro, Vice President of Zimbabwe Economic Society, as well as Agnes Magunje, a chairperson of the Informal Traders Committee. Informal Committee.
Informal Traders Empowerment Association.
There we go. There. Thank you so much. We needed to say it in full. So thank you.
I was about to say soon to be SME.
Oh, so it's small to medium enterprise. Yes, there we have it, and corrected there. So thank you so much for coming in and sharing your views, and we look forward to a year that will bring forward a lot of wishes, of good intentions, and hopefully economic prosperity for all sectors within the country. Thank you so much.
Thanks
and for Lucky, I guess that's our time. Quite a lot of interesting things. There was a lot of history. I wanted to mention that as the professor was giving the budget, you know, going back to 1990, where we can have single-digit inflation.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
Yes.
Also, you know, if we could go back to I think 1980, around about the 1990s as well, where our manufacturing rates were about 23% and going upwards.
Yes.
So we are really looking forward
We're
to
going up there. We've fallen to about 10%.
Yes.
Into the contribution of manufacturing into GDP. It's now 15%. Ideally, we should be between 23 and 25%.
Absolutely.
So we're going there, and that's very good. So I think, by the way, the minister announced that he's putting in a tax rebate for employers
who employ young people. Yes. So I thought that was fantastic. So employ young people.
Yes.
You will get tax rebates. But all in all, quite a lot of positive things to look forward to. And we hope and anticipate that indeed the 2026 budget will bring forward a realization of NDS2, predictable policies. We want a balance between fiscal and macro aspects within our framework economically. And of course, we'll keep you posted and keep you engaged in more discussions as the policies are implemented and as the 2026 budget comes to life.
Indeed. And from Rimbi and I,
it's a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.